The Raiders and head coach Antonio Pierce part ways with 3 coaches on the offensive side of things. So what's next, and what are the challenges that are faced the rest of the season? That plus more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for November 5th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're checking in on YouTube, as my man Ari produces the YouTube show each and every day, does a fantastic job behind the scenes at Ari Produces. You can hit him up on Twitter, but we do appreciate the YouTube love. Or if you just check out the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast, we appreciate that as well. It doesn't matter if you tune in for 2 minutes, 22 minutes, or 42 minutes, whatever the case may be. Like I said, we always appreciate you, Raider Nation, and that's what continues to fuel this show each and every day. Got a lot to get to on today's show. Of course, your calls and texts, plenty of your feedback at 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. We'll close out the show with that. Coming up in segment number 2, what challenges will face Antonio Pierce and the Raiders as they move forward following the bye week? We'll do that in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as we always do. And please believe there's a lot of news and notes to get to, right? We'll get to that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. We'll tell you more about them later on in the show, but let's go ahead and jump right into it. And Raider Nation, I got to admit off top, being a guy that's been traveling, I traveled on Sunday very early, leaving Las Vegas, flew out to Denver, then Denver to Hartford, and drove from Hartford to Bristol, Connecticut. I'm on the campus at ESPN. As you can tell, I'm recording this podcast right now in the old Mike and Mike studio. Back in the day, Mike and Mike, this was their studio. I did this last time I was here on campus, and just a great pleasure to be here and be able to, meet and greet with a lot of folks that are here and, just show my face. I do about once a year. And again, just to have the opportunity to work for ESPN is something that's really been a lifelong dream. So with all that being said, I tell you that to say, when I knocked out the podcast for Sunday, I had just basically got into town and had gone and had a little bit of food downstairs at the hotel, and obviously watched the game on the flight and all this. But the time zone is so weird to me, and it shouldn't be. It's only a 3-hour time difference. But going from being super light out to being super dark, when I recorded the podcast, I felt like it was really late in the day. And it clearly wasn't, right? When I recorded the podcast, it was actually the afternoon games were going, and I felt like Sunday Night Football was going on. And then I realized later on, Sunday Night Football wasn't going on. So after a full day of traveling, I went back to my room, and I crashed out. So when I crashed out and I woke back up, it was probably, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. East Coast time. But that was not quite Monday yet when it comes to West Coast time, which obviously the podcast is always released around 12:05 West Coast time, 12:05 a.m. West Coast time. That's what I aim for each and every day. So I tell you this whole long story to tell you, I didn't get all the breaking news that was going on with the coaching staff. I didn't get that on Monday's show because I'd already done it. I knocked out, went to sleep, and felt like it was good to go to sleep because, it's going to be midnight in a little while anyway. Yeah, midnight on the East Coast. So I completely blew it. I guess that's my big apology. Completely blew it for not having all the information on Monday's show and really just talking about what could potentially happen instead of what did happen. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get you caught up. The Raiders did fire offensive coordinator Luke Getsy. That was not a big surprise. That was the first domino to drop. Also, offensive line coach James Craig. He was the next one to go, and then quarterbacks coach Rick Scangarello was the next. So all 3 of those coaches are officially gone. I also mentioned on Monday's show that I wasn't going to be able to be at Antonio Pierce's press conference, and I thought it was going to be around 11 o'clock because I'm obviously traveling, and it was going to be at the Intermountain Health Performance Center. Well, little did I know that it was going to be by way of Zoom. Found out later on that it was going to be by way of Zoom, so had the opportunity to be a part of that press conference, and, that was a great thing, right? Had to be a part of that, especially after all those moves that, again, a move to fire Luke Getsy was something that was anticipated, and I wasn't even sure if they were going to fire him originally. I thought maybe they would just strip him of his play calling duties, but AP decided to make the call to get Getsy out of there, James Craig, the O-line coach, and Rick Scangarello. And a lot of folks were wondering, man, I didn't see all that coming, and I didn't either. But when you go back and look at it, the offensive line, obviously the run game hasn't been there at all. They can't run the ball, and they can't pass protect, right? The Raider quarterbacks have been sacked 30 times already this year, right? In the run game, we know it's not very good. Quarterback play hasn't been very good. So, when you start to think about it and the moves that have been made, they make sense. But I just didn't expect to see them that quickly based off of what I know so far from Antonio Pierce. Whenever he has a Monday press conference, he never says what moves are being made on that Monday. He always says, well, I'm still talking to the coaches, still talking to the players, and we'll reevaluate, and when there's an announcement to be made, I'll make an announcement. So normally that's not till Wednesday. Clearly, he was ready to get it over and done with by the time they landed that plane back in Las Vegas following the trip to Cincinnati. So he made those decisions quick, fast, in a hurry. I don't know how many outside influences or people upstairs influences that he may have had. When he met with us by way of Zoom, he said that there were no influences. It was a decision that he made. Everything just was not going the way it needed to go. So that's that. Now, with that being said, Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, who's an NFL insider, he tweeted out on Monday, following the 3 offensive firings last night, the Raiders are considering bringing on veteran NFL coach Norv Turner in some role with the offense. Source says Scott Turner, his son, remains the leading candidate to be offensive coordinator. And I wanted to bring that to the table because AP told us on Monday when he met with us that he wasn't sure yet. He was going to use the bye week to decide who was going to be the offensive play caller. So Scott Turner looks like he's the guy who's going to be the offensive play caller. People asked me on Twitter who I thought it was going to be. He made the most sense because he does have experience. I also heard Rich Gannon. He does Raiders Roundtable with JT and Eric Allen every single Monday. And I heard him saying that it was going to be Scott Turner. So I'm sure Rich Gannon has a much better idea of what's going on inside that building than I do. So it looks like all fingers are being pointed to Scott Turner as the next offensive play caller. But I'm interested to see if he brings on Norv Turner. And the reason I'm interested, not that Norv Turner is not a sharp offensive mind, because he is, but really? Is that what he's doing now? I mean, there's so many coaches on staff already. Right? I mean, it's just like you're bringing in another coach. And again, this is not something that's guaranteed. It's just a report that's out there. But bringing on another coach, that's the decision. That's the direction that you want to go. I don't think that that's the right decision to keep on bringing on new people. If you're going to bring in someone else or have another guy call the offensive plays, it's going to have to be similar to what Bo Hardegree, I think, in my opinion, what Bo Hardegree had to do last year. Take Josh McDaniels' playbook, go through it, and do the best he can. Right? I mean, the Raiders are 2-7. I don't think any of us are foolish enough to think that they're going to all of a sudden go on a 8-0 run down the stretch and make the playoffs and you make some deep run because all of a sudden they got this magical playbook. I just don't see it. Right? I mean, the quarterback play is questionable. The defense is questionable, as I talked about quite a bit on Monday's show. Like, there's so many things that are questionable about this team. They just have to salvage something and make it look respectable. We're going to talk about challenges that they have moving forward coming up in segment number 2. That's part of it. I just don't see why it would make sense to bring in someone else. And, oh, by the way, Norv Turner has been removed from the game for a while now, right? So I just don't know if that's a good direction. You already have Marvin Lewis. You already have Joe Philbin. Bringing in Norv Turner would be a questionable decision. But then again, if you're desperate, maybe that's just something that AP has to do because he could potentially be desperate. Look, you fire 3 guys on the offensive side of the ball, right? There's obviously going to be a lot of questions like, well, who's the guy who hired them? And that was him. So, of course, there's going to be a ton of questions about Antonio Pierce moving forward. Speaking of Rich Gannon, he was on with Michael Lombardi on VSiN, and that's a sports gambling network, but they have some really good shows on there. And anytime Rich Gannon says anything about the Raiders, I'm all ears. Now, when Michael Lombardi talks about the Raiders, I'm not. I understand that his son was on the coaching staff with Josh McDaniels, or actually his sons were on the coaching staff with Josh McDaniels. I understand Antonio Pierce fired him, so I don't really listen to what Michael Lombardi has to say. But I did find this to be pretty intriguing about what Rich Gannon had to say when Michael Lombardi asked him what he thought about the moves that were made, firing the 3 coordinators, the 3 coaches that AP fired, and just kind of the state of the team right now. Check it out.
Look, this is an all too common occurrence with the Raiders, right? We saw this last year during the season. When you listen to the head coach, Antonio Pierce, and his comments here the last couple of weeks, you got the sense he was getting frustrated with what was happening offensively with Luke Getsy. Look, this is an all too common occurrence with the Raiders, right? We saw this last year during the season. We've seen it again this year. It's just an absolute mess. And I think you hire a head coach that doesn't have experience. You hire an offensive line coach who's never been an offensive line coach in the NFL. He's been an assistant, but he's never really had to run that room. And, you got a quarterback coach. It's really not a good situation there with the Raiders. And I think the other problem is that, you look at the football team itself. At some point, we can keep firing general managers. We can keep firing head coaches and position coaches. But at the end of the day, how about the players? I mean, they lead the national. They have 19 giveaways this year. It's the most in the NFL, and it's not even close. They can't play defense. They're supposed to be really good on defense. They're not good on defense. Joe Burrow threw for 5 touchdowns yesterday. At some point, somebody in the locker room needs to look around and say, you know what, guys? How about we play better football? How about we practice harder? How about we pay a little bit more attention to the details? I just, I think it really gets back to the culture and the environment in the building. And to me, that's where I'd start.
To me, that was some really good stuff from Rich Gannon. Again, I'm not listening to Michael Lombardi. He's like that bitter ex, right? She never has nothing good to say about you. She's always trying to one-up you. She's always trying to, do this, that, and the third, right? Tell anyone who will listen how you're worthless, right? We all have that ex. Oh, it's just me? No, it ain't just me. But you know what I mean. But yeah, that's what happens. So I don't really worry about Michael Lombardi, but I know Rich Gannon doesn't have an axe to grind with the organization. I know he wants nothing more than to see that organization really good, as a lot of former players want to see that organization really good. So I thought that was pretty interesting what he had to say. Coming up in segment number 2, I'll let you hear the response that AP had to the question that I asked him at the press conference that I thought was a very important question to ask, especially about his confidence moving forward and the challenges that this team is going to have and he's going to have as he tries to close out this season, the last 8 games strong, and prove why he should be remaining the head coach of the Silver and Black. That'll come up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple great sponsors here, including Game Time Picks. Game Time Picks is fantastic. If you want to go to an event, it doesn't matter what it is, sporting event, theater, it could be comedy shows, it could be anything that has a ticket. Game Time Picks has got the hookup for you. They filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get super deals. They have great seat views before you buy. That's one of the features that I like the most. They have all-in pricing, so you'll check out all the cost and you'll know exactly what it is well before you go to check out. But again, the seat views is my favorite. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And once you buy, you've got the purchase is always going to be covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Right now, all you got to do is take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms do apply. Create the account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word for $20 off. And you need to spell it LOCKEDON NFL. Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time? I also want to tell you about FanDuel. And, well, you need to jump into this NFL action. And if you're going to jump into the NFL action, get a little skin in the game, you need to do it with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, all new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, check out the latest stats. You can view the live play-by-play and so much more, and it's all located on the same page where you place your bets. So what do you need to do? Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to jump into the challenges that Antonio Pierce and the Raiders will face the rest of the way. And I've talked about it for a few weeks now, that it's evaluation season, and every loss that has gone by, and now the Raiders are sitting there on a 5-game losing streak in the bye week. Every single loss that goes by, every move that's made, now going from three coordinators no longer on the staff, it intensifies. Everything intensifies by 1,000, right? The magnifying glass, it's getting a little bit closer and closer to you, right? Every single move that you make is going to be dissected. And, of course, the lights are even brighter on you now because all eyes are on you. And when you're you, I'm talking about Antonio Pierce. He's the guy that was in charge of putting this staff together. He put the staff together, and clearly it's not working. So there's a lot that he has to do moving forward. So he met with us on Monday, and it was really good, I thought, press conference, almost 10 minutes long. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if he was going to just make a statement to start and then open it up to questions, but he just opened it up to questions immediately. And so as I listened for a while, and I like to do that, kind of sit back, listen, get the temperature of what's going on, I got curious about, the confidence level, and AP's always been a guy who's very confident in what he does since he took over as interim coach. I mean, even before that, he was very confident. Everything, that's just who he is as a person. I mean, going from being an undrafted free agent to being a Super Bowl champ, right? I mean, you have to be confident. He's always shown that. He's always shown great leadership skills. So I asked him a question about his confidence level, just leading the team moving forward after making the shuffle on the coaching staff, and the team's sitting there at 2-7. A lot of times doubt can kick in. So here's the question, and Antonio Pierce's very detailed answer I thought was fantastic. Check it out. Coach, you've always been very confident with everything that you do. Is the confidence still there that with the makeup of the guys in the locker room, and I know there's been some obviously shuffling with the coaches now, that you can get this thing turned around because there are still plenty of football left to be played?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously confident in my ability to lead and do what I'm asked to do as the head coach. I just had that conversation, oddly enough, that you asked me with our staff and asked them, what's their confidence level? Where are we at? And because that's going to be reflective onto the players then reflect that onto the field and their play style. We got to get that back. And it's hard to be confident when you're losing, right? I can sit there and have a smile and be gritty and all that stuff, but human nature does take an element of it. There's a piece of human element of there as far as your emotions that go into it. But I'm confident in my ability to lead this team, to get them going. I think we fight. I think our effort is there. Our execution is poor at times. The opportunities that we have, we let them slip through our hands, and we got to stop doing it. And I don't use the excuse of playing with a young roster. I actually look at that as an advantage for us, right? Because I got a guy that I can mold. He's a sponge, and I can feed him what I want him to be and what him to do and what I want him to look like. And that's why I told our staff, man, just use this time with the players that we got in and out the lineup to just keep molding them. Now, yeah, there's a continuity there, the chemistry there. It's hard when you in and out of the lineup. Hell, we played 8 old linemen yesterday. I don't think I've ever seen that before. At least been a part of it. But at the end of the day, man, I'm not going to the question of our team with our effort and our fight, that's going to go through. They love one another. They're fighting. They're not going to let people poke holes in armor right now as we're going through this tough stretch. But like I told them, we got this bye week to regroup. We'll do that over the next 42 to 72 hours, and we get ready to come back and get ready for Miami.
So there's Antonio Pierce. He's still very confident that he could lead this team as the head coach. And I had no idea that he had mentioned that to his coaching staff before he met with us. I had no idea, and that's why he mentioned it. It's ironic that you asked me that, right? That was not something that was on my bingo card. I just was listening to the presser and thought that, I wonder where the confidence level is right now. Because, look, he was flying high as the interim coach last season, but when you're the interim or the substitute teacher, I like to call it, you have nothing to lose. Right? I mean, because you're not supposed to get the job anyway. You're not supposed to be there. You're just being a break in case of emergency break glass guy. But once it's your team, once you put it all together, once you're responsible for everything, then it's on you. The heat's on you, right? And look, I'm learning that myself firsthand, right? Being the program director at the Las Vegas Sports Network here in Vegas. Well, I'm not in Vegas right now, but I mean, with Raider Nation Radio 920 and all the stations that I oversee, right? When I was at ESPN Central Texas, it was easy for me to go in and fill in for Smokey because, well, he was the guy, and now he's not the guy. So I'm just going to go and do the best I can based on what I learned from him and try to keep the ship afloat. Well, that's what Antonio Pierce did last year. He kept the ship afloat, won 5 games out of 9, right? Gave the players, hope, and they were all fired up and excited about him. And, he earned the job to stay on. I was all aboard on that. I know a lot of people were on board on that. A lot of people are saying that they weren't on board with that now, and that's fine. It's easy to do when a team is losing. So maybe you were part of the minority. But I know that there was a lot of folks that were just like me on board with Antonio Pierce being the head coach. But now that you're on a 2-7, that's your overall record, you're on that 5-game losing streak, and you've had to fire some of the coaches that you hired, now you have to prove why you're hired. You have to prove why those players in the locker room wanted you to stay on as coach. And with that being said, I had a caller on my radio show, Raider Nation Radio 920 on Monday, say, I want to see the players coming out of the bye week prove why they wanted AP as the head coach. Like, play for the guy when that's what you wanted. You pounded the table for him. Now go out there and show why you wanted to pound the table for him. So, but he's got a lot of work to do, and he's got so many challenges because right now nothing is guaranteed for anybody. Right? Every one of these players is out there playing for their next check, their next contract, whatever the case may be, because all these players aren't guaranteed to come back. There's a handful of players on the defense alone that I've talked about that are free agents, so they have to, prove their worth. Hell, a guy like Patrick Graham is under the microscope right now because the defense hasn't been very good the last handful of weeks, right? And, I mean, I'll take it a step further. Max Crosby is good. He's really good. We know that, one of the best edge rushers in the league, but he's been hampered with this high ankle sprain. He hasn't been playing that well. I think he'd be the first to admit to you that he's not playing at the level that he wants to play at, right? This is what we would consider a down season right now for Max Crosby, and it started out hot. So everyone has to prove their worth. And when it comes to Antonio Pierce, his biggest challenge is that not only can he lead men, because I have no question that he's a great leader of men. Some guys are really great leaders, and some guys are better X's and O's guys, right? Some guys, sometimes you get lucky and there'll be a guy that's great at both, right? Being a great leader and being able to, do the X's and O's and the in-game, adjustments and the in-game decisions. And, it's just perfect at what they do. That guy's hard to find, right? It really is. But sometimes you get that. I have no doubt that he's a great leader of men. The question is, can he be a great NFL head coach? And he doesn't have to prove it to me. And, I had someone get it misconstrued and said that, oh, you were questioning AP and you didn't question Josh McDaniels. I'm not questioning AP. And even if I was, he wouldn't care about me, right? It's the people upstairs. And really, more importantly, who is in charge and who's going to be making these decisions? I don't know the answer to that. I'll be the first to tell you that. Obviously, Mark Davis is the owner. We also know Tom Brady is part of the ownership. So what does he have to say? There's still not a detailed answer on his role. There's reports out there that he's set to hire somebody when the season's over. He already has someone in mind. And I don't know if any of that's real. That's why I don't bring it to the table, right? But there's plenty of different reports are out there, and if you Google it, you can find it, right? But again, I don't know what's real, and they're not from people that I know as trusted sources, or the Vinny Bonsignors, the Vic Tafers, the Deshaun Reeds, the Paul Gutierrez's, right? Guys like that, I know that they know exactly what they're talking about, and it's coming from a place of, that they've talked to someone that's high ranking. And if I talk to someone that's high ranking, I'll tell you. That's why I get in trouble. That's my biggest problem. I tell you. Someone tells me something, I'm like, oh well, hey, let me tell Raider Nation this, and then I get a text message like, Q, what are you doing? I'm just passing on the information. But that's just me. That's why I'm who I am. So that's why I'm not an NFL insider, right? I don't. That's not my role. But in all seriousness, he's got to prove to the folks that are gonna make decisions that this is his team and why he's the head coach of this team and why he should be that head coach moving forward. And so that confidence question that I asked him, I thought was very important to see where he was, right? And it wasn't a question that was out of line. It wasn't me questioning him. And honestly, you heard what he said. I asked the same thing to my coaches. Where's your confidence level? We've got to instill that confidence back in the players to go out there and execute. Because, again, they could have all the belief in AP, but as long as they're losing, at some point they're going to start questioning. Well, maybe he's not right. Maybe this is not the right place for me. Maybe this is not the right scheme for me. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this technique that he's teaching. Like, there's so much. It's so easy to nitpick and question when you're losing or things are going wrong or you're not feeling like you're doing the best of your ability, right? It's just so much that goes into it. So the challenges for him the rest of the way are to keep those guys in that locker room all fired up, playing together as a team, not pointing the fingers, not falling apart. I had a question on Monday's show, a caller, how do you know when they lost the locker room? You'll know, right? When players start coming out and making questioning the coaching or saying, it's not my, you got to ask someone else that's not that's not above my pay grade or whatever. Just, you could tell. And I don't believe he's lost the locker room at all. From all the players that we've talked to, they all sound very, pro AP still. But that could change if they lose 2 more in a row, 3 more in a row, right? All of a sudden, they're on a 7 or 8 game losing streak. You saw what happened with the Saints. They lost 7 in a row, and Cam Jordan's not even going to the locker room after the game. Derek Carr's going to chase him, and then they fired their head coach, Dennis Allen. They started out hot. They were 2-0. Everyone was talking about Clint Kubiak is going to be a potential head coach next year. He's got the hottest offense going. And then they lost 7 in a row, and Dennis Allen's out of there, right? The Raiders have lost 5 in a row. I'm not saying the AP is going to get fired in season. I don't think that that's going to happen. I really don't. But I think that he's going to have to prove that his coaching style, his vision for this team is something that's going to work. I briefly talked about it on Monday's show. It's something that he's going to have to prove. The players are going to have to prove. Everyone's going to have to prove because there's going to be a lot of folks. There's a lot of money, a lot of draft capital, potentially a very, very high draft pick as well, that you're going to have to prove, can work with this team. Not to mention, right, who are you going to bring in? Who's going to be the next guy as the offensive coordinator, right? I was talking about with the trade deadline. Matter of fact, today's the trade deadline. I was talking about potentially bringing in like Bryce Young for a 4th-round pick if that was something that was possible. Like Carolina wanted to give him up for a 4th-round pick. Like if they would take that and accept that. That was a suggestion by Mike Tannenbaum on Get Up on ESPN Radio or on ESPN on TV, I should say. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. The Raiders should do that for a 4th-round pick. But now that they don't have their offensive coordinator or their quarterback coach or their offensive line coach, it's like, wait, hold on. I don't know who's evaluating who. So you can't bring in some outside talent, right? Some more outside talent if you're not even guaranteed to be there. And right now, nobody's guaranteed to be there once the season gets wrapped up. So there really wouldn't be any sense to trade away some draft capital and bring in a guy that who knows who's going to be coaching them, or if you're going to be coaching, if you're even going to be on the coaching staff next season. So what you have right now is what you have, right? I do think that Desmond Ridder is going to start the rest of the way. Coming out of the bye week against Miami, I think he's going to be the starter as long as he doesn't get injured or completely stink it up. I know Aiden O'Connell is scheduled to come back in a couple weeks, but I think it's going to be the Desmond Ridder show the rest of the way. I think that's a decision that we'll find out sometime this week is going to be made. But Antonio Pierce's biggest challenge is going to be keeping this team together and showing why he's the head coach and showing why he should be the head coach moving forward. There's plenty of people that have already given up and said, hey, I'm ready to move on from Antonio Pierce. This experience is over. He's got to prove why it shouldn't be. It's not a me thing. It's not a you thing. It's a him thing. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and that is BetterHelp. And as I do that, I do want to shout out to Mama Q. Mama Q has always given me a lot of assistance and a lot of confidence to do what I do and, has encouraged me when I've been down, right? When I used to call her on the phone after my radio shows on ESPN Central Texas and say, this is it. I can't do it anymore. She'd say, all right, son, calm down. Relax. Everything's going to be fine. Remember the big picture. Vegas is going to be calling any minute now. You know that. And the days that I didn't believe it, she always had my back. So, Mama Q, thank you. And, well, this month is all about gratitude. Along with Mama Q, who I just shouted out, there's another person that we don't get to thank enough, and that is ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything. In this crazy world, that isn't easy. So here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. If you ever thought about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. It's real easy to get involved. Again, you let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Again, Better, BETTER, Help, HELP, all one word, .com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation. It's segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Went a little long in segment 1 and 2, so we'll just get time for a couple calls and texts here. Let's start things off with Raider Eddie in Denver. He's calling to give a few positives and also ask a question about the Raiders' running game. Here he is, Raider Eddie in Denver.
Hey, what's up? This is Raider Eddie in Denver. I really do appreciate your show and being able to call in and weigh in. I want to start with the positive. I do feel good about our O-linemen from the draft, JPJ and DJ Glaze. Really like both of those players. I think we've got 2 starters right there. I hope JPJ can stay at center, and I hope that DJ Glaze can stay at right tackle for us. Also hope Colton can come back healthier next season. My question for you is about the run scheme. Last season, I think the last 6-7 games, whatever that was, under AP, we had a really good running game. I believe it was a power scheme, and we had Zamir White. We had Illuminor, I believe, at right tackle. I can't remember who the guards were, but in your opinion, what's the biggest thing that changed from this season where the run game has been so poor to from last season when there was some success. And I guess I also want to say, I think it's AP's job to really try to bring over whatever was working, to bring that over to this season. The fact that he hasn't been able to do that is really unfortunate. But what do you think is the biggest thing that's missing? Is it the scheme? Is it a player or two? Is it a Luminor? Because it was Zamir White who was having success. And I'm just curious why this coaching staff and Telesco couldn't keep what was working or even make it better from last season. It seems like that ball has completely dropped. That's allowed the quarterbacks to be really terrible, and eventually poor offense has allowed the defense to be on the field too long and to not be good. So to me, that's the heart of a lot of what's going on here. And again, before I get off the call, just want to say I think this is really up to AP. He's got to be the one who's smart enough from last season to this season as the head coach to really advocate for what they need. I don't think he knows what they need for that running game. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks, Q. Have a good one.
Eddie, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. And yeah, the positives are really positive, right? I mean, the extremes with the positives are great, right? JPJ, DJ Glaze, I believe JPJ is going to be the starting center the rest of his career. That's what I think. I mean, he's looked good so far in a game and 14 snaps outside of the penalties that he had the first game that he took over at the center position. I think he's been really good. Glaze has been really solid at the right tackle spot. I think you found your starting right tackle. Obviously, Brock Bowers is as advertised, and then some, right? You mentioned Colton Miller and coming back healthy. I'd like to see him come back healthy as well. But now he's dealing with the ankle injury, right? He was dealing with the shoulder injury and the surgery that he had in the offseason, and he was rehabbing from that. But now he's got the ankle injury. As so many people suffered ankle injuries on Sunday against the Bengals, like 5 guys all with ankle injuries. That was all bad. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with that turf there in Cincinnati. But, that's a whole nother scenario. I'd like to see Colton Miller come back really healthy and strong. I have a feeling that we're probably in the last few days of seeing Colton Miller. What does that mean? That he'll be gone after this year? Not necessarily, but maybe next year. I don't think he has a whole lot more time left at that starting left tackle spot for the Raiders. But that's just my gut feeling. As far as your question goes, with the running game, for me it's the scheme. And that outside zone running scheme has never worked for the Raiders. It works for every other team in the league. Like every team, whenever they want to run it, great, fantastic. For the Raiders, it has never worked. Every single time we have seen some offensive coordinator and offensive line coach implement that and have that's going to be the running scheme. It never works, ever. And I don't know why the Raiders are not good at it, but they just never have. Zamir White did really well in the power blocking scheme, in the power running scheme that he was in last season. We saw it the last 4 games of the year, and obviously the Kansas City game was the highlight. But I think he's a lot more confident in that scheme. He's obviously comfortable, so that goes hand in hand. Comfortable and confident all goes hand in hand, and he's able to thrive. Do they need probably a more dominant running back as well? Sure, right. I think that we kind of know that Zamir White might be a change of pace or just another back, right? He might not be that guy that you can look at and lean on and have him carry the rock 20-something, 25 times a game like a Josh Jacobs like we got used to. He might not be that guy when it's all said and done. He might be a guy that's just good to spell another running back. So I'm sure that they probably need to go get another running back. But, yeah, that zone blocking scheme, that zone outside running scheme just doesn't work for the Silver and Black. But thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Boogie Oogie in the IE. Says, hey, Q, it's Boogie from the IE. I think AP made the necessary changes along the coaching staff. I think AP should look to Brady for his next offensive coordinator. Get back to the power run scheme and hire an experienced offensive line coach. No trades I see happening. Also, AP needs to trust himself. Sometimes too many voices aren't a good thing. Just want to see the team complete and player development along the way. This offseason, get your quarterback by any means. I think AP will take the season and learn from it. This is the first time I agree with the head coach hire in a while. Fans need him, give him time to grow, just like their bosses did when they first got hired. But I have high hopes. That's Boogie Oogie in the IE. And thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. And yeah, there's a lot to agree with. Like, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you say there. I just don't know who the final decision makers are going to be. I don't know who ultimately is going to decide even Antonio Pierce's fate. I really don't. It feels like the writing's on the wall, right? I mean, it's like these 3 coaches get fired. There's reasons for them to get fired. Like you said, it was something that people have been talking about for a while. It finally happened. Figured that if anything was going to happen, it'd be during the bye week, so it was. But what do they do moving forward, and how does AP prove his worth moving forward that he should be the guy? Again, I'm not saying that he's not, but he's got to prove it to the people upstairs, the people that are the final decision makers, whoever that is, Mark Davis and company. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't know. Like I said, Tom Brady he's almost one of the big unknown, right? Because there's not too often that a 10% minority owner of anything has an opportunity to make decisions. But from the sound of it, he's going to have an opportunity to make decisions. I just don't know what those decisions are and how much he really does have that opportunity. So we'll find out sooner rather than later. But thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from South Florida Raider. He's calling to talk about the firing of offensive coordinator Luke Getsy and Antonio Pierce as the Raiders head coach. Here he is, Southwest Florida Raider.
Q, Southwest Florida Raider. Well, Getsy's gone. Great. In my opinion, he shouldn't have been hired to begin with. I feel the same way about AP. I was most definitely in the minority in the offseason when they made AP the permanent head coach. This is an offense-driven league, and AP is not an offensive guy. Sorry. It was a great story, but unfortunately he's a square peg in a round hole. He needs to go. Hell, keep him on. Maybe he goes back to his old job, but he's not head coach material yet. There's plenty in the nation that want to keep him for the sake of continuity, and I say that in quotations. Continuity in what? Losing? This team is worse than last year under his direction. And there are way too many high-quality, proven offensive coordinators out there looking to be head coaches. And you combine that with a potential high draft pick, perhaps a quarterback. And now you got something. Do you think the Raiders are going to overlook Ben Johnson, Todd Monken, Bobby Slowick, and, Cliff Kingsbury? Sorry, I realistically can't see AP getting another year with those candidates floating out there. Also, do you really think AP has the knowledge to mold a high first-round quarterback into a franchise quarterback? I don't think so. Unfortunately, to me, anyway, it appears that the AP experiment has run its course. I believe it's time to move on, and let's get an offensive-minded OC in there, and let's turn this around. Just my 2 cents. Southwest Florida Raider, peace out. Raiders.
Southwest, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And another part of the minority that didn't want Antonio Pierce as the head coach. And look, it's funny, man. And I'm not saying that you didn't. It's funny that there's so many people that are part of the minority that didn't want Antonio Pierce, when I felt like there were so many people that would call into this show daily and pound the table and text and all that and say that. But again, I'm not saying that you weren't one of them that wasn't anti Antonio Pierce, but it's so easy now for so many people to say and pound their chest about how they never wanted Antonio Pierce to begin with. So I guess I'm on that island by myself, and that's okay. I'll own it. That's cool. There's a few other people on the island with me, but the reality is he's the coach right now, right? I mentioned earlier in segment number 2, he's got the biggest and brightest light shining on him. He's under the most intense microscope. He has to prove his worth, right? The Raiders will probably do exactly what you're saying and go and get another guy if he can't prove that, right? And I don't even know if that decision might already be made for all we know, right? That could be the inevitable. It could be just like, all right, well, he's going to coach out the rest of the season. We're going to see what players are worth the salt that we want to keep around, and then we're going to overhaul this thing and make some like that already could be in place. It really can be. I'm not saying it is, but I'm also not saying it isn't. That can very easily, and you know how decisions are made, in anything. Right? You start looking for replacements and you start putting the plan in place before you actually, or at least you should, before you actually, start making moves. So, I could see them saying, hey, let this guy coach out the rest of the season. And then at the end of the year, they'll get together and make a decision on who, again, going back to the big elephant in the room, whoever that involves. I don't know who it is, but buckle up, right? I'm sure that Antonio Pierce is probably going to have some nights that aren't the best slept nights, right? Because I'm sure he's going to be pretty concerned about his job, right? And for good reason. Again, there's no reason why this team should be 2-7, right? He went 5-4 down the stretch last season. They went 8-9 as a team. There's no reason they should be 2-7. This team should be better. But as Ed Graney asked him after the game on Sunday, is this a better team than what it was last year when you took over? And he said, well, the record says no. They're not. They're not a better team than they were a year ago, and there's no reason for that. They should be better moving forward. After having a whole offseason to put this thing together, being able to bring in his players, his coaches, his thumbprint on this team, they should be better. Unfortunately, they're not. So that's all I got time for on today's show. Sorry, I wanted to get to a couple more calls and texts, but I went a little bit long in segment 1 and 2. So I got a text from Raider Jason in the 304. That'll be tomorrow. Zach from SAC. That's Sacramento, California tomorrow. Benny and San Mateo, I got you. That's all coming up on tomorrow's show. And, of course, we'll have more news and notes. We'll have plenty more conversation. We'll see how this week goes, because I don't think that the moves that are being made and have been made is the it, right? I think that there's going to be more moves still made, and we might not find out what it is until they get into their work week when it comes up to the Miami Dolphins. But I think that they're going to see some more moving and shaking before it's all said and done. Of course, we'll be here to talk about it. Again, I'm here in Bristol. I'll be here till early Thursday morning. Then I'll get back on that bird and fly back to Vegas, and everything will be normal. I'll be back on my Pacific time, the West Coast time, the best time. It's East Coast time, man. It's for the birds. So, yeah, I don't want to do any of that any more than I have to. So, be back in the normal confines coming up on Thursday, but got a greenie this morning from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific time, and that's, 10 to noon Eastern time, and I'll be doing it live from the ESPN studio. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'll do that today, and I'll do that tomorrow as well as my shows on Raider Nation Radio 920. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.